Well, thank you very much for coming. This is the fourth one of these events that we've put on, and each time we get a better and better crowd, and hopefully a livelier and livelier crowd to ask more questions. But with that, we have a great panel here tonight. Honestly, I don't know what they're doing here, except for I know a couple of these very personally, so I'd like to say that they owe me a favor, but it's probably the other way around. But with that, we're going to start out with Chris here, and they're going to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their background, and where they are uniquely fitted to position to talk into this space.
Good evening, everybody. Hi, I'm Chris Bond, and I'm the CEO of Bluewater. I started Bluewater about 19 years ago, and the focus of our company is to help organizations recruit, develop, and promote individuals within their business. So I've been around the learning and talent space for about 30 years, so I've seen lots of interesting things. We've got a great client list that will go all the way from companies that are about 250 employees up to millions of employees, which is pretty interesting, especially when we get in this space and talk about recruiting. So great to be here tonight. Looking forward to all of your questions and to hear from all the other great panelists there. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. My name is Mark Mitford, and I have a company called HR Catalyst, and we are a strategic HR consulting firm. So in essence, a lot of companies, and I don't know the size of your organizations, but I do have a couple of clients here this evening, but a lot of companies who are our target client is usually 250 people and below. And those are organizations that I jokingly tell clients that you probably can't afford me full-time as a VP of HR, but you can afford me part-time. So we are your traditional fractional executive model. So a lot of you are very familiar with the fractional world now that we live in. And so we actually are fractional HR advisors. Myself, I was actually started in DFW many years ago, but next month is going to be 32 years in Dallas, all the way through a couple of notable companies, Ericsson, Texas Instruments, and PepsiCo. And then I dropped down in size to head up HR in middle market size companies. And then then I had a little bit of a different change of events, and God had a different plan for me then. And so 9 years ago started HR Catalyst. And we have a small team of strategic advisors, and we work with people to help them create and implement a people strategy to grow their business. Thank you.
Hello. I'll stick with the one that works. I am Kim Kelley, and I am the CEO of a tech company named pepelwerk, where we help you think about and execute hiring differently so that you can actually get ready to hire the next generation workforce that we are all going to love and enjoy working with and pass the baton down to as we do our own resignation. My experience is 25 years deep. Chief HR Officer of some of the world's largest companies and Chief Strategist for some of the world's largest companies. And I've just bottled all that awesome knowledge up and made it all of these innovations, forward-thinking strategies, planning ahead for our workforce and our companies, and made it really easy for small and commercial-sized companies to execute those same strategies. So thanks.
Good evening. My name is Mark Galvan. I'm with ProForce Innovations. We are a Dallas-based company but serve organizations virtually, mostly in the small to mid-market space. My background is a result of surviving Accenture. I was with Accenture for about 9 years, and my next promotion was to partner, and that's when I opted out. I ran North American operations in San Antonio in the major outsourcing center for all HR outsourcing. So we had payroll, compensation, recruiting, and benefits administration, all kinds of stuff. We had about 250 people there, and then folks offshore as well. Major clients, Transportation Security Administration, Kimberly-Clark, GMAC Financial, Capital One Financial, and so on. So since then, I've been about 10 years in the small to mid-market space. It's been a wonderful place to be. It's a great place to make a significant impact, to take executive enterprise level strategies and techniques and ideas and bring them down to the smaller organizations and help them achieve similar success. So today we focus on two things. One is employer branding, and that is polishing your employer reputation to make you attractive to your target candidate audience. It makes it a lot easier to recruit amazing people. And And then we also have a recruiting division that is like an outsourcing service, fractional recruiting as a service that handles outsourcing for clients as well.
So that was a great introduction. Thank you very much. Now, for most of y'all, I don't know about you, I've almost gotten to the point where I don't even watch the news anymore. There's probably a couple of hands that would go up on that. So instead of listening to what perhaps the talking heads are talking about on the news about the Great Resignation, what's causing it, the great thing is we have people that are boots on the ground, both on the recruitment side and on helping companies to get things done. And so they're talking dynamically with all parties involved. And I think this is probably the best source of really finding out what's going on and how to solve this problem. With that said, I would love to start out, Chris, perhaps with you and with everybody about really getting your understanding about some of the root causes of the great pandemic. And we'll try not to go political, just for what you're seeing, and help us understand that, because understanding the cause may help us find the solutions.
So pandemic, are we talking COVID or no. Great Resignation, no, I know, I'm just joking with Bert. Look, it's this entire Great Resignation is not something that's brand new. It's been something that started 5, 6, 7 years ago. And there's really two reasons why we begin to see that. Number one reason is culture. There's a lot of companies that preach culture, but they're not practicing culture, and they create a culture of not fun at the job. And people are beginning to say, I really need to have some meaning and some purpose in my job, and so culture becomes really, really critical. The second item is that it's a whole lot easier to go get a new job at another company than it is in your same company. So as an example, we look back 3 years ago, and 80 to 90% of all recruiting that organizations would do is external, not internal. And so if I'm internal in a job and I want to go find my next career move, that next location, I could be thwarted by a manager who doesn't want to let me go. There's not enough information to know about positions. Maybe I want something that's different. I want to move to a different state, a different country. I want a different role. And I could be a great employee, but there's no information. However, there's thousands of companies that are out looking for great people. And so the recruiting external versus internal is now beginning to shift. People are waking up and going, wait a second, we need to market to and recruit internally more than we do externally. So there's a shift there. So for me, the two big reasons we see from our clients is, number one, bad culture, not really creating an environment that's going to keep people around. And then the second one is really around, it's easier to go get a job externally, a new job, one that you think you're going to love externally, than it is internally.
Mark, how's that work for you?
Yeah. Chris said it just about perfectly. Yeah, I would say that one of the key things that I run into is that a lot of people, when you think about it, and this is nothing that's COVID related, but so many people, they do not leave their job. Most people do not leave their job for money. Some people, of course, you do hear stories where you can make X amount. And I grew up in the telecom market in the 90s. When the telecom market, one story was that you did not even have to leave the parking space you're at. And you could go to a company next door, and you could make about 20% more. And that was a true story over in Richardson when that was telecom corridor. But I think the biggest thing nowadays is, too, that organizations do such a poor job. Most people leave a company because they don't trust or respect their boss. And in many cases, their boss, especially the target clients that I work with and the companies I work with, again, lower middle market, if you want to say companies that are $5 to $75 million, most of them, when you think about it, the amount of leadership training they've done, guess how much? 0. And so you think about the investment of leadership training, even though, because a lot of companies say, oh, well, that's going to cost us a lot of money to do. Or we're going to have a lot of people who are not going to be at the workforce leading. And so we're doing such a poor job, I would say, middle market sized companies on down, and I worked for some iconic companies that put so many millions of dollars into training. And most companies, though, that are your 1,000-person, 5,000-person employers or less, they put either very minimal or almost no investment in training, especially with their leaders. And if you're not training your leaders how to lead, how to communicate to people, how to motivate people, how to take care and do things around talent management to really reward your top performers, and how to discipline or possibly coach your poor performers to either coach them up or coach them out, then that's, I would say, one of the biggest disconnects that's also exacerbated the Great Resignation.
So Kim, I'm going to pivot this on you a little bit, so here comes the fun. So I get it that this is probably an emerging, growing wave on this deal, but let's face it, in September, we had 4 million people that left their job without another job. So in your perspective, what kind of leads to this tipping point? I get it that there's a wave of momentum, but what do you believe led to that tipping point of so many people just saying, you know what, that's enough for now? Good luck.
I have a couple maybe contradictory thoughts to contribute to everyone's mind. One, was it really a tipping point, or was it something that was already happening? The degree of which people left jobs has really not changed when you look at the percentage of change. And just to give you a little insight into my head is always focused at looking at the future. What is the forecast? In 10 years from now, what really is our people capacity? What are we doing to foster the right people for the right level of jobs that we have as a city, as a state, as a government, as planet Earth, unless, Bezos or the other guy gets his way, right? Has it happened? Yes. Has it happened incrementally in a phenomenal way that we really didn't anticipate? No, we should have all been really ready for this. And what is it that they left for is the other question, right? So the scale, sure, is there, but when we say that they didn't leave for jobs, is this a Department of Labor job? Because if you look at the Department of Labor reports, these are very traditional scoped jobs. I have a name, I have a title, I have a rank. That is not the way that most people look at ways of earning their income today. So when resignation happened, it's not resignation because I'm changing from a truck driver to a truck driver. It's because I'm looking at what my capacity is for the same earning potential and reward my life in a different way. So there's some, I don't want to get caught up in like the whole, yeah, I'm with you. I don't watch the news a lot anymore because I don't like their headlines, and I think they're maybe a little overhyped. But I really want to take a moment just so that everyone can acknowledge the reality of the talent market is that we always know our numbers, just like any other supply chain. We always know what our school systems are doing, what the children are choosing, what jobs people are gravitating towards, what geography they're moving in, what capacity for competition is in that same job. We always know those things. But now there's this additional variation or flex point, I'll say, in earning potential that just isn't traditional, the way that we've been doing things for the past 20 years. And those are the things that companies have to become more aware of and acknowledge, whether it's the Great Resignation or just a simple transition in what work is.
I'm going to stop saying Great Resignation and the other ones that I tried. Because the three of y'all convinced me, possibly the talking points that we hear so much about just aren't the reality that's really going on. So I really appreciate this insight because it helps to reset what is normal for our own observations, which helps us to know that, okay, this isn't something beyond our control, it's something very much within our control. So with that, Mark, how do you feel about turnover and things of that nature and retention? So fairly normal or a slight bubble just because of a shift? And where do you see some of the biggest opportunities for companies that might have some turnover to take advantage of this situation?
Two questions there. Happy to answer both because One of the things that I come from, I'm a very data-driven environment. If you can't find data to support your hypothesis, then it's just anecdotal. On the handouts for tonight, there's a page that has been provided which shows a graph, and that's the Department of Labor unemployment rate over the last couple of years to present. And one of the things that's staggering is that you see overall unemployment rate was coming down year over year up until about 2020. And then all of a sudden we have a massive spike in unemployment up to 14%, just overnight, okay? What happened? Did everybody, all these tens of millions of people just suddenly decide they hate their boss? Or they, can go find a better job, same amount of money, better culture someplace else? I suspect something massive happened in the marketplace that affected demand for labor, demand for people, and as a result, this is a combination of termination, separation, election, people that voluntarily quit. So some people call it the Great Quit. It's a mix of people that were terminated because their jobs were impacted by a variety of things. Now, all that's coming back. We see the numbers. It's coming back stronger, but it's going to take time to get back to where it was. Is this an opportunity? Heck yeah. One of the things I learned a long time ago when I became a manager or supervisor decades ago was every time somebody quits, it's an opportunity to trade up. And so how can we take our lessons learned from the folks that we've had in the past and now go to the market and find somebody who's a game changer, a good cultural fit, technical fit, has the ability to bring capabilities to the team that fit and help elevate the performance capacity and capability of the organization.
What do you think the effect of vaccine mandates have on this? I've got a lot of contacts in the national security community, and a lot of them left their jobs in September and October.
Sure, there's a massive exodus. People were forced to abandon work because either they saw the writing on the wall and they got out before they were terminated, or they were told, allow yourself to be terminated, and they went through that process and were displaced. And then there's the other factor of these folks, they're harder to fill the positions if there's a vaccine mandate required by the organization. So we do recruiting for companies that have vaccine mandates still in place, and we have organizations that don't. And it is 2, 3, 4 times harder. We have open truck driving positions for vax requirement, and it is recruiting costs are through the roof because you've got to find that little tiny sliver of the population that is willing to move, take the job, has already had all of the vaccine requirements, and it's made it more expensive. So it's displaced people in volume, and it's also made it harder to recruit if it's a requirement.
Kim, how does that sound to you?
Oh, I'm bugging.
Yeah, no, I can see your hand moving back and forth.
Why do I get the one that doesn't work all the time? Hello. Okay. So I love the question because there's so many ways that somebody can answer that. But when we're in a room of business people, if you have a government contract and the government contract warranted you to do it, and you just got to do it to check your box, okay, do it to check your box if that's really what's happening. But there is also a cost of doing business that is very expensive to that decision and how you communicate that decision. So you talked about branding, and you talked about the difficulty of being able to actually get the business decisions thought out through how you're hiring. And it's like this all big chain reaction. So is the mandate a roadblock to having a conversation? Yes, but just like everything else that we promote at PeopleWork, every conversation has a time. What the next generation of people that are willing to work, if you set out some fundamental intel for them and then say, well, there is a condition of mandate and this is the way that we approach it, there are conversations that can be had that can preserve getting that person into the door if you just don't slam them with something so prohibitive in the beginning, because the cost of doing business and dragging out that recruiting is astronomically expensive. So all I'm saying is, you got to do what you got to do, but make sure that when you're communicating those kind of really disruptive requirements to somebody getting into the door, that you strategically place them so that you just don't waste money and time from people who are very willing to work for your company, work at the wage that you're willing to get them to work at. But if you put all of these other conditions on them too soon, they just might not even give you a chance. It's I don't know how you feel, but that's
Very nice, very nice.
I have another question here. What you mentioned before, and that maybe I misunderstood you, but it felt like you're nibbling around the edges of, like, the nature of what work is now a little bit different. And a lot of people, what we heard, I heard in a conference on Tuesday, is that there's a lot of, millennial and Gen Z workers that are kind of leaving the workforce because they would rather engage in entrepreneurship in its many current forms. As an employer, these people have a lot of qualities that I really, really like and that I would love to engage them with. So I guess but I can't, I'm not offering them the promise of getting TikTok famous. And so I guess my question is like, how would you advise that we kind of capture the imagination of these people that are really creative, and they like taking risks, and they're energetic? How do I convince them, like, no, don't go out on your own. We have opportunity for you here.
I will go back to, I appreciate the question because I deal with these kids all the time. And actually, I hire them into my company all the time. And they do have this impression of the world that is very much, drop out of college, I'm going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. Like, that's their vision of what the future is for them. There's two things that I stay consistent with. It's how you're messaging, what you're messaging, and when you're messaging it during the process. Expectations are a big part of that. And with the next generation, expectations are the key. Like, you set out the fundamentals of the who, what, when, where, why, so that they can have a decision to come in. But that why part is so critical for them, and it's very different for every company. So if you let them flex those same muscles in a different way that's not as rigid. I had a job description. My job description that said I was going to do these 50 million things plus whatever else they told me to without any additional pay, right? That's what we're used to. What they want to know is, how can you let me accentuate my attributes that are the most, that will make me the most successful? And when you place them in positions that let them do that, they will stick around. And we've been doing that for 6 years and helping companies do that for 6 years. It is not that they don't want to or they won't find the discipline in what you're asking them to do. It's the positioning of what it is that you're asking them to do.
That feeds really well into two articles I recently read from The Economist, and Mark, these will go to you. So the first one was really talking about the desire for entrepreneurship within a company, right? So maybe not being Mark Zuckerberg, but I kind of want to be able to influence my own realm. And that could have come out of more experience to the gig economy while we were just out there doing stuff. The other part that was interesting, and I think correlated, was the article went on to say that the average employee will want 9% more if you dictate their schedule, and they'll probably want 3% more if you demand that they can't work remotely. So how does that resonate with you, and do you think that aligns with your perception of the world?
You have a lot of layers in there, Bert, that's for sure.
But it's that multi-question I gave Mark, so I didn't want to cheat you.
Yeah, no, you're good. No, I think it is. It's one of those things because there are so many, and if you wanted to call it the perfect storm, I think there are just so many things that are happening right now in the workforce. One of them I go back to some fundamentals of that, and I've got a couple of, it's interesting, I've got daughters in their 20s, and I actually have a millennial and I have a Gen Z. And so they're right on the cusp of each. But I look at them and they're very traditional type workers. But I think about a couple of their friends, and it's amazing. A couple of their friends, and they both have 4 degrees from Baylor, sick and bears, if there's any bears in here. And they came out of there, but they have several friends who are a few of them are on their 4th job. 2, 3 of them now are entrepreneurs. They decided they're already tired of corporate and they want to do something different. A few of them are coming out of the big 4 firms already. Probably half of them are come out of the big 4 accounting firms and said, we're done. We don't want to do the 12 hours, 14-hour days to try to make it to partner. So I think the way we're looking at things now is that we have to really go back to what are the employers now. I think a lot of us grew up in the age of the employers have the control. And guess what? The employers no longer have the control. And it's almost diametrically opposed. If we have a company, or many of you are entrepreneurs here, you built this company from your own blood, sweat, and tears, you still have to make sure when you hire people, whatever age they are, if they're in their 40s, their 30s, or 20s, ask them what's important to them. You know, a lot of companies that go back to companies they spend, of course, you mentioned benefits. And benefits, employers always cringe because they just keep going up and up in cost. But in some companies that I work with, you know what? They're offering the wrong benefits. And if you actually ask people, their employees, what benefits would really resonate with you and keep you here, it's amazing because a lot of times they're offering the canned package from the 1970s. And they're no longer offering innovative packages, whether it's truly healthcare benefits or something else. It goes back to the other thing I think, and hopefully this is answering some of the question there, Bert. The other thing too, a lot of companies now that have moved to unlimited PTO, guess what? Most people don't use that much PTO. They use less PTO because they hold each other accountable for actually doing work. And so because a lot of people are thinking this place is going to be a ghost town all the time, and we're not going to get a darn thing done. Guess what? Most companies that have offered unlimited PTO, they actually have their productivity's up, their profitability's up, their revenues have also increased. And so again, it's kind of a mindset shift, and it's allowing the mindset shift of freedom, and to allowing the employees to say, you know what, I'm smart enough to kind of manage my own career. And you still have to be able to, if your work is done, you can go take a day off or 2 days off or what have you. But if your work isn't done, as long as the manager understands they still have some accountability and they still have some ownership there, then the manager can say you can't take this time off. Then I think that, again, it just creates a self-managing system or ecosystem that a lot of companies cringe if you mention that to them. But in companies that are offering this is highly successful, and it's actually all the financial metrics show it's a good way to go.
Mark, I'm going to go back over to you because I could see your face over there. Smiles, and all those are smiles of affirmation or of a different observation?
One of the things that was part of the original question was the way in which work gets done and the transformation of the environment because of young people, different generational differences around attitudes toward work. I think the businesses that I've worked with in recent years, I challenge all the time to reevaluate how you want the work to be accomplished because you have more options than just W-2 now. So if you see the environment changing around you, you're going to be hurting if you don't evolve also. The most nimble and flexible, sometimes we call it scalability and flexibility together, are those that have gig workers, they've got offshore team members, they've got full-time W-2s, they've got part-time W-2s, they have 1099s, and when you have that type of a work mix, you have a lot of flexibility. And when you have somebody on your team that can start thinking that way, it changes your ability to respond to things much more effectively.
Jim, I think you have a question?
Yeah, so in the sense of the way that you work with people working remotely now, I've seen all kinds of up and down on the data about productivity. What do you think about the productivity of remote workers relative to people working in the office?
Are you just asking in general?
Anyone who wants to answer.
Kim, I think you're next. So.
I'm next. I got the number. So this is my opinion on productivity. It's a matter of perception and unique definition to every company. So in general, if you're going to say that productivity decreased, against what metrics? If you have projects that are associated to tasks, those tasks are met by deadlines, those deadlines have a percentage. What do you care if they were available or accessible 9 to 5? Your projects are running efficiently, effectively, the work is being done. If you have shifts that aren't filled or completed, and that's a very finite definition of productivity. If output in a supply chain system isn't delivered at the same level of output, I would challenge somebody's definition of productivity, right? So when businesses get trepidatious around working remote, I ask, is it a control issue? Is it a lack of processes internally? Is there a lack of understanding on what success is? And if any of those things exist, then of course you're going to be anxious about people not being in your purview because you really don't have an understanding of what the scope is of a successful day, right? So I've talked with some companies as they've had to transition. Oh my gosh, I just got told to shut up.
I did not cut you off.
Well, I've talked with many companies that have had that angst of making that transition from you're in my face, you're in the office, so because you're here, I assume you're working and doing things. But honestly, most of them didn't measure productivity before then, so we really didn't know.
Got another question here.
Yeah, before you ask, let me follow up on that. Can I ask a question? How many of y'all have undesked workers? Undesked workers. So they don't really have a place to work. So undesked workers, you're going to find a lot in restaurant, retail, manufacturing, those organizations. How many of y'all have, consulting, so non-desk workers? One of the really interesting statistics that started coming out from a bunch of research organizations in the fall is that globally between 65 and 70% of the workforce is non-desk. That means virtual doesn't even matter to them, right? So you're in a really different place, and I just want to make sure we don't get too hung up on the fact that the virtual workforce versus working in the office is like this transcendent changing thing, because so much of the workforce that's out there is used to not being at a desk, not being in an office, not working in that environment. So it's not that big a shift or a change to say, hey, I'm going to take somebody from a retail organization and I'm going to make them virtual, or I'm going to do that. In fact, one of the things we've done with a number of companies we've done ourselves is we're finding undesk workers that actually going to want to go work in an office. They're like, I'm tired of standing on a retail floor. I don't want to be attending bar at a restaurant. How do you begin to train them up and do something different? There's a lot of different opinions and ideas that are out there. So I think that diversity of thought between employees makes it super important when you're recruiting. You've got to have a true picture, like Kim was saying, of what is it that I really want this person to do? What's the value of that? You communicate that, you will find people that are out there that are just dying to get back and collaborate with individuals that are working virtually, and you're going to find others that are like, I just want to work at home.
Mr. Dave?
Yeah, this is somewhat directed to Kim. I've got an engineering firm that I consult with, and he decided last year that he would just send everybody home and convert everybody to contract. Part of productivity, though, is not judging how much productivity you have, but be able to project productivity. He wants to grow. Well, now that everybody's home, he's not sure what his projected productivity is. So it's good to be able to send everybody home, and you can say, how do you judge productivity? How do you judge productivity when everybody's home? They're getting projects done, but you can't project whether they have the capacity to do more.
Yeah, I mind if I jump in on this one, because I've been chomping at the bit myself. I love metrics. I know that's a shocker. And I love simple metrics because I can't handle the complex. So some of my favorite metrics about productivity is revenue per head. All right, it's my largest resource. It is probably my largest, most mobile expense. And if you track that readily and on like a trailing 3, trailing 12, you're going to see when the blips come up. Or you might shift down to EBITDA per head. But if you start out with a macro measure of productivity, it'll tell you when you need to dive deeper. Because my give a hooky factor about somebody working remotely, as long as my revenue per head is about the same, I'm fine. Now, if it starts to dip, we're going to ask why. But as long as it's at X or better, then it's great. And then using it as a projection tool, it's outstanding. Because then I can say, okay, here's my revenue. That means if I'm going to maintain my level of profit, productivity, I can only have X number of heads. Or if I'm going to hire X number of heads, I better have Y amount of revenue. It drives some really challenging, great conversations within your boardroom.
Yeah,
First?
I'm going to ask one, Bert.
Oh,
So, and then whoever's next, I'll come to you. I've got the mic, so. So raise your hand if you want to take the question, but two things I want to ask. Number one, this is a statement. I think companies have to look at marketing their business. You all were talking about like if you're not thinking this as a sales process, like you would for customers, you better start looking at it that way, because you are selling your business, you are selling those positions, you're selling the flexibility, the benefits, whatever those things are, and you better know, like, literally, what do they want, because you don't know what to sell them if you don't know what they want. And then my question is, don't you think a lot of this is just simply a paradigm shift that a lot of us old heads aren't able or willing to make?
that hurt. Thank you.
I'll take the first one. I'll take the second.
I think we got a little guys. This is hitting a nail on the head kind of comment, because we've seen recruiting done the exact same way for the last 30 years. And it has not changed a whole lot, except probably 10 to 15% of major companies. Matter of fact, you can go to Indeed or Glassdoor or any other job site, and you can look up employer brand manager, just as a job title. And you'll see that the very largest companies in the world now have this person that's allocated to create the story, the sales process, and the mechanisms to be able to attract talent. That's where we stole all the goodness from to be able to serve the middle market. There's a page here in your handouts. It looks like this. It's got a 4-quadrant chart on it. It shows the difference between your consumer brand, your employer brand, your talent brand, and your culture brand. They are all different with different audiences. And when you're trying to talk to recruits, candidates, people you want to bring in, you better have that sales message really dialed in. And there is some secret sauce. And I think we're going to get into that.
Yep, that's next. So first, go ahead, and then we got...
I think he wanted the other people to address.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody has anything to add?
No, I think we're going to get into I know we are, on the questions, on the topic to kind of follow along with that. But yeah, I mean, marketing to prospective employees far ahead of when you think you're going to hire them is going to be critical.
My question is the Great Resignation a false narrative? And we are just in a superheated environment. Good. Obviously, we have inflation and other issues, but a great economy. And it's created a demand for talent when work, as we know in the past, definition has changed.
Who wants that?
I'll take it real quick and I'm going to pass it to Kim because, yeah. So my personal belief is yes. The idea of the Great Resignation is great headline material, great fodder for discussions and pundits and those type of things. But the reality is, again, as I said earlier, this has been going on for 3, 4, 5 years. There's a change. There's a massive paradigm shift that is going on in that process. And we as business owners have to find a way to begin to adapt to that, because work in the future is different. How we consider that, what we look at, a lot of things that I know we're going to get into tonight are going to be there. I personally believe it's, false narrative, because this process is already there. The other thing that I heard from one of our really big clients, they said, right now my biggest struggle is that I hire somebody, I put them in a role, and in 6 months the job changed. And they don't have the skills. I can't predict what the skills are that they're going to need, because I don't even know where the job is going to change. And so if you look at the skills, the learning, the training, everything that's got to go on, it's creating this issue of change and feeding the paradigm that I think is going to create something super unique and actually great for all of our businesses once we fight our way through this.
So I know Kim has something to say, but Mark, you on the way?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the Great Resignation is, again, it's a really nice tagline, and it's something you can, you push your hashtag on, but I think it goes back to a lot of it's the fundamentals, that the workforce is demanding something different than the workforce contract or the employee contract than that was expected 5, 10, 20 years ago. And I think that organizations are now dealing with they don't want to allow the employee to have control and perhaps get to dictate some of the things that they want. And so the employee so I think it's a little bit of a tug of war. It's almost like two teenagers fighting it out. It's like, which one's going to win? Because I think the employers are still, in most cases, some of you may be highly innovative here, but I think a lot of employers are still wanting to keep the old paradigm of work. This is the way we define work. Just a quick story. In the 1980s, so this goes back to a long time ago, I was in grad school in San Antonio. I worked for a company that had a 4-day work week. USAA Insurance had a 4-day work week. It's amazing how many companies are saying, oh my gosh, this is innovative, let's have a 4-day work week. It was, people came in at 7:15 and they left at 5:15, and you either worked on Friday or you worked on Monday. You either got Friday off or you got Monday off. So that was 30-something years ago. So I think, again, a lot of companies really need to rethink how they actually, what are you doing to differentiate yourself from a company perspective? And to a lot of the folks here on the panel who are experts around, how do you market that?
Okay.
If you have something innovative, then you got to be able to market it effectively.
Kim, one more comment, and then we're going to shift into recruitment, which is probably what more of y'all want to hear as we go forward.
Well, my comment is super brief. Every headline impacts our business world. If you watch any trend, and of course this is my nerd life, if you watch any trend, whether it's the Great Resignation or automation is going to hit, you will see a deep dip in applications for certain jobs and a serious spike in wages for certain jobs for no practical reason except for hype and emotional reaction that it invokes in people. It's either the business decision makers that are saying, oh my gosh, now we have to plan this, and now we're going to now throw $6 more per hour and inflate our benefits, which then has a very expensive down trickle effect to all of our small and commercial sized businesses, where it makes it very difficult to compete. So are things happening? Yes, but do they happen at the scale of any of these news headlines? Very rarely they don't, but they are inciting a reaction in business leaders that has very detrimental consequences to our economy in the long term. We're now starting to eat away at our own margins. There is a lot of stress being put on those that are performing because they're trying to make up those that aren't performing for different wages. I mean, it's a full circle kind of crazy town that happens. So I'm glad you brought up the topic. All I can give you is my 2 cents, which I just did. I'm not the president. I can't solve that today.
Got one more question here.
Okay.
Oh, really, probably more of a comment. There was a lot talked about that what we're seeing today started prior to the pandemic, and I think that's very true. I think the workforce in the beginning, if you understood that they wanted a purpose, they wanted to belong, they wanted to be able to make a difference in that, and the companies that were successful in putting that in, they had a stable workforce, high productivity. But I think as the generations changed, as diversity of the workforce changed, we were dealing with those prior, long before the pandemic came in and became a disruptor. And as a business owner, your focus is now trying to keep the business going and handle all these other things. So I think many comments that the panel made today is right on target.
Thank you very much. For those that still have kind of questions on this general area, they're going to be available afterwards, so feel free to come up afterwards. But I do want to go ahead and pivot into, because this is a room filled with mid-market entrepreneurs, which means you're somewhere between 5 and 50, maybe 75 million for the vast majority of us. And that means that you need to get things done. So we're going to shift this conversation into recruitment and vetting. And we're going to start out with, certainly, Mark, this is kind of your wheelhouse. So relative to what's going on in the marketplace between, recruiting people, selling people, and getting them productively engaged in your company, let's start talking about some of the best ways to get their attention, get them to the interview table, and get them interested in what you have to do.
Okay, so I was anticipating this question. So there's a page that I'm going to refer to, and it's the one with the arrows on it. And it shows, it's kind of like a pivot table of a bunch of best practices. So over the last maybe decade and a half, we've been looking at what large companies have been doing in the area of being able to attract, hire, and retain people. And what we find is that we can kind of lump all of the best practices into 5 major things that they've done that everybody else has not done. So I call them shifts. The first one is they create a very consistent candidate experience. So this is a very practical thing, but the reason why it's awful in most companies is because you've got somebody that does sourcing, somebody that does recruiting, somebody that does interviewing, somebody that does first interview, second interview, hiring manager, and then they've got a different person doing orientation and a different person doing onboarding and a different person doing deployment. That's all part of the onboarding process, and chances are they don't all have the same continuity of experience for the candidate. The second big thing is this two-way authentic communication. We know people lie on their resumes, but companies lie on their resumes also. We have websites with pictures of some other, office someplace, and it's not our real organization. We've got, benefits that, kind of embellished a little bit. We got to be authentic, because that really authentic conversation elicits a lot of transparency. It's a really great way to get great people to open up. The secret weapon is really what we call candidate persona marketing. We've stolen that from the marketing industry, where you tailor a message to a target audience. And it's so strategic that it's almost like, sometimes we call it chemistry. Because when you have the heart of a person, you have a connection with them that's more than money. Implement control and containment. That's because you have all kinds of people out there on the internet that are posting bad things about your company. Just go look at Glassdoor and Indeed employee reviews, including past employees, including people that interview with you that you don't even hire. They get a voice also on the internet, and it's on the internet forever. And even when it gets scrubbed, it's on way back. So having a control and a containment strategy is huge. And then finally, use experts that can help you with some of these very practical, tangible things that you can do to implement a overall candidate experience that attracts the right person and keeps them in place.
What technologies are y'all seeing that are really productive in connecting with these new seekers?
People work?
Timing's
Somebody else can
everything,
take
Kim.
that one.
Timing's everything. So do you want to tell them a little, and
Yeah.
I'm not trying to sell you, but you want to tell them about
You
a little
should.
bit about what's unique? Because we all see online recruiting application software. So give us your insights on that, about what you see is really productive in the marketplace and, maybe less productive.
What do I see that's less productive, considering my audience, is I think that it's very unproductive and really expensive to try to replicate all of those models and steps and processes and systems and people at the same level that big enterprise companies do. I think that I see a lot of really anybody who is not a Walmart or an Amazon or whatever should not be targeting to spend an astronomical amount of their budget on talent acquisition, especially when there are such efficient solutions partners, experts out there that are there to help you because they know better and can do better. What have I seen well is really just what Mark just said. People work selfishly. My spiel here is that we help you, the technology helps you execute this evolution easier. If you actually want to learn how to better scope your job and turn it into a job profile to set better expectations, we can help you do that, because that is a mistake that current employers are really struggling with. If you actually want to identify somebody for their attributes and attitude over technical fit or resume fluffing or gaming, then we're the right experience for you. But one of the things that I would say that I'm probably am speaking to the choir, we all know what we've been doing for the past 30 years needed to change. The number one response I get from companies that are coming into our platform are, well, you know, we still do Indeed and we still do ZipRecruiter because there's no other way. And I'm saying I have another way. There are plenty of other ways to go about this. And in fact, when you speak to the next generation on those legacy platforms, just ask them what they think of those legacy platforms. And you'll understand exactly what I'm saying. So if there was something I would leave in as just a total reaction to you, is just reflect on what you have changed to know if you've actually done something to produce different results.
Okay, Mr. Mark. Oh, Chris, you wanted to jump in?
Maybe, except even though it's not on. I'll take the mic from Kim. All right. So this is loud. This has actually been my life for the last 30 years, is learning and talent technology. How do you acquire using technology? How do you develop people using technology? How do you use that for succession planning and promoting? So I live here in this particular world, and Bert knows I could probably go on and on and on for about the next 15 hours on this. Here's the key message. Technology doesn't matter unless you have process. 80% of this is process, 20% technology. Do not buy any technology thinking that technology is going to solve your problem. It won't, because you'll never be able to buy the right technology unless you have process already in place. Now, if you don't have process in place, you need to go get process in place, and then there are technologies that are out there that absolutely can help you through that process of being able to go find and identify and bring the right candidates inside your organization. Now, to Kim's point, there's some incredible stuff that we're seeing out in the marketplace that is AI technology driven, that big organizations use. They call talent marketplaces. The entire idea of a talent marketplace is I'm going to go out and actually market or take individuals that I've identified internally and externally, and they become candidates. They're candidate relationship management systems, much like Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or others are applications that allow you to go after sales leads. No, we're going to now go market to candidates. We're going to openly do that. We're going to use information and data that we find about these individuals in order to be able to target jobs and positions and locations and everything that they would want to know, and begin to recommend those items in order to be able to even get them into the recruiting process. So that's the difference. The step one in the future is I actually have to go out and figure out how to get somebody even interested to want to apply for a job at my company, or even in a particular industry. There are a lot of industries right now that are really, really hurting because they can't get anybody interested in the industry. They're going to have to go out and market and attract them in a similar way that we're seeing a lot of Gen X and millennials and even all the way up to baby boomers get marketed to in a variety of other areas. So you got to get them interested first. Then you can begin to use technology to help screen, get people to apply. There's technology that will help you with all the background checks. I mean, a lot of new innovative things. One I will give you that is, I won't call it innovative, but I'm going to call it one of the creepiest things I've seen, is that there is an organization that's out there that you're basically recording videos for interviews, and it does facial recognition to be able to identify whether the person's telling the truth, whether they're lying, the entire bit, and then it provides that feedback. Yep. There we go. And it provides that feedback and information. Yeah, somebody didn't want me to let you know that. Anyway, it's really creepy weird, but there are a ton of companies that are using that to pre-screen employees. So all the pre-screening of employees, here's the final message that I'll have kind of on this. And if anybody wants to talk about this in more detail, happy to talk afterwards, and we can get on the phone and talk about all these cool, neat technologies. But if you make the recruiting process impersonal, that's all the way from encouraging them to be a part of your organization, to the recruiting process of the organization, to the description of what does onboarding look like. If it's impersonal, then I will guarantee you 70% of those people will leave in less than a year. It has to be about the individual. It has to be personal.
Chris, if you could just tell me about the top of that funnel that you were talking about, as far as like sort of creating these systems that help you kind of use a Salesforce-like thing for who are those people that might be interested. What comes to mind is the stuff that you see like on LinkedIn, where it's like, hey, we're all cleaning up on the highway together, we're building a house, and I'm just kind of like, okay, okay, who cares? But I'm just kind of curious as to like that very first, like the tip of the iceberg, like what are the tactics and techniques that you're using to sort of first identify somebody that's like, hey, this is somebody that we might be interested, that also might be interested in us?
So great question. There's a massive amount of data about all of us that's out there, but let's use LinkedIn as an example. So there is one organization that we do a little bit of work with, and the name of the organization is Eightfold. Big organization. Their primary clients are going to be Fortune 500. But what they're doing is that they actually are gathering data out of LinkedIn in order to be able to identify profiles of any individuals from past careers and jobs, current careers and jobs, and then they're taking that and looking at what their patterns are in terms of progression inside their organization in order to be able to use AI engine to go match those individuals to hey, you might be really interested in company A, and let me begin to tell you about company A. If you're responding to them, then they're going to take you to the next level and begin to recommend potential jobs, regions, ask questions. They'll actually bring you into their application because they originally got all your data out of LinkedIn. There's other systems and applications over in Europe that are similar to LinkedIn where you'll get a lot of that data, but they're actually collecting available shared data in order to be able to create that top end of the funnel that says, hey, I just want to find out whether you're interested in working for Bluewater, and at the point that I show some interest, now they're going to take me to the next level and the next level and the next level. I mean, it's really pretty crazy. I mean, just it is right out of the marketing playbook type stuff.
So I'm going to pivot on that just a little bit for the rest of y'all. What I'd like to hear from y'all relative to this top of the funnel is, what do y'all see as best practices that attract people into the funnel when you're dealing with companies in their recruitment? And what do you see are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that? That it's, kind of start with, let's create no harm, let's do no damage. So if you could talk about some of that, about the things that you see in the marketplace that really help to bring good candidates in this marketplace that we're missing them to a company, and the things that are absolutely like, bug repellent.
I would say, and again, I am compared to the folks up here on the panel, I'm not an expert on this area, but one of the key things I think about is that if you ask your employees who've been with the company for less than a year, what were some of if you're going, I'm an older guy, so I'll do old school here. So if you ask them what actually attracted them to the organization, what were some of the key things that they thought were really innovative about the organization, whether it's your culture, core values, this type of a program you had? And one of the key things through just having a simple focus group with people who just joined the company, who are doing well, who seem like they're really, these are going to be some top talent for you longer term, ask them what attracted them to the company, and then what you have to do then is just replicate it. So it's kind of a little bit of guerrilla marketing. It's not as sophisticated, not high tech, but it is very effective, because a lot of times too, when talking about focus groups and things like that, it's amazing if you ask people, what are the things that attracted you to the organization? A lot of times you'll find 75, 80% correlation, and then you go out there and just do it over and over again and replicate it.
Kim?
I have to say that I would think it would be funny if the candidate flipped that AI tool on the people who they were interviewing. Maybe the CEO or maybe the president next election, we could use the tool. I don't know, something like that. So sourcing for people work is a little different because we just don't deal with the multiple layers that an individual company would have to deal with. What our job is to work with partners like FutureSolve and others in the market to help us ferret out what is the next best innovative tool to help create economies of scale for all of our clients. So I couldn't give you like a unique solution or what people do or should not do because that's our job for our clients is to vet it out and execute it so that all you have to do is swipe right, swipe left. For what other things I've seen people do that I would never recommend is overcomplicating it, over-engineering it. And I think that goes back to process and people. One of my sales guys sent me something similar to this AI thing. I'm like, great, you don't ever have to talk to a human ever again in the job process. What's going to happen? So I guess that's it. Just don't over-engineer it and don't take people out of the people process.
I'd like to speak to this, though, since this is really probably the strongest core competency we have at ProForce. Identifying what are the characteristics of your organization, how does that match up with your candidate avatar, that ideal persona of personality, skill set, character, competency that fits within your organization. We start with an audit. I mean, there's no way to simplify this. We're talking about a sales funnel. We're also talking about diversity. Not everyone's going to come and join the organization for the same reasons. Okay, so we do an audit. We look at the good and the bad because a great person might find really bad things about your company. So we go out and we find the lawsuits and we find the claims against the business. We find all the negative comments on all the platforms, and then we figure out what's the mitigation strategy. How do we flip that stuff around and turn it into a way to create positive messaging? Then we look at job descriptions. We look at what's the hook. Just like in sales, you got 5 seconds or 3 seconds to get somebody's attention. That's called the headline. And then they're going to have 7 more seconds to look at what's above the fold. And if they don't like that, they're going to scroll continuously. So you've got to be able to get that attention. And then we use a webinar marketing strategy as well. And that's amazing because most people will listen to something for 20 minutes, but they won't read for 30 seconds. Right? I mean, you're nodding, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So we do webinar marketing for our candidates. And we do a separate, unique webinar for each candidate, each skill set, each job opening. And it's amazing how many people will click on that thing and they'll listen to it because they can do it anywhere. It's an infomercial. We're not just recruiting, we're selling the brand of the business, we're getting followers, we're getting social mentions, we're getting all kinds of massive value other than just the candidate. So there's a whole package of best practices, and we have a white paper that's on our website on how to get a lot more from your recruiting process than just a candidate. Because, for example, if you have 100 people apply for a job and only one person gets hired, that means 99% is waste. Now, from a lean Six Sigma perspective, where else in an organization would you tolerate 99% waste? Nowhere. I mean, that's unconscionable. So you don't want to treat all those people like, they're chaff. You want to be able to treat every person like a VIP. So there are a lot of best practices. And when we do the audit, we're able to identify all the different places in that life cycle of the candidate to be able to put those things in. And they are really differentiating because 85% of companies don't do any of this stuff.
Very nice, thank you.
I just had a comment to the question here, but a lot of companies, I feel, hack the web and wait for an application, right? And if we're looking at it from a business development and sales, nobody's coming through the door. What are you going to do? You're going to go straight to the customers and approach them. And many of us are just sitting there waiting instead of actually flipping it and saying, how do we actually go to the right candidates and approach them? And that is usually something that I feel like is a big gap in the understanding of, just sit and wait. And it's not the way things are going now. There's a lot of demand. So we just need to find a way to actually approach them. The other thing that I always see is, in marketing, they'll know exactly what that customer looks like, what they eat, how they sleep. We don't know anything about our current employees, about how they operate, so we can actually replicate that. If we use those same things of actually growing business to look at how we grow a company inside, we have some of the answers already and the strategies.
Very nice. Like that. It reminds me, I talked to one company, and they were really using language that was like, they consider recruitment a process that is ongoing. and it's not an event targeted towards filling a seat. Because what they want to see is a constant stream of talent coming across, and then, okay, there's a seat available, great. If not, just keep on moving, time and place, but they're constantly recruited. Now I'm going to pivot to a little bit of once they're in the company. Let's say that they've used y'all's techniques, technology, et cetera, and now they have them in there. We were talking about selling the company. And, you know, y'all can beat me up about my process, because what I'll typically do is says, hey, look, this is like a marriage. You know what? You have to be a happy seller, and I have to be a happy buyer. And I make it very clear, you can ask me any question in the world, and I'm going to answer you. And if you don't like my company, then I'll try and plug you in somewhere else. Ben, I hope I use that language with you, but I may not have. But when it comes to selling, where do y'all see the best person to really help that person understand the value of the company, the value of their role in the company, and where their happiness or fulfillment might be? Is it going to be the CEO? Is it going to be the hiring manager? Is it going to be their peer? Or where does that really fit in, and how does that come together? A multi-question deal, I get it, Mark. But,
Okay, I'll do the quick reply, because look at it from a candidate perspective. So if you've been on Lean Six Sigma team, you've probably done some type of process flow mapping from the perspective of the customer. That's very, very different from the operational team's process flow from the inside execution perspective. The candidate is the customer. So just like what Andy was saying here, you've got a picture of who they are. We have to know what they want in order to be able to position it in order to get their attention. We have a lot of things in the business that we can promote or highlight, but we've got to be able to put all those things forward, because we don't know which hook is going to actually get the candidate engaged. Somebody else want to add something?
Tim, Mark?
I was actually initially taking your question a little bit different when you said in the door. So I've hired somebody. The one thing that we all have to think about is we have to constantly be selling the value of our company and who we are every single day as business leaders, CEOs, founders, owners, but it also has to be the people inside your organization. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to create the culture that allows you to go out and do a lot of the great things that, I mean, I love the idea of, never thought of it before, going out and doing a webinar just to market to potential candidates and to bring them in. How's that going to happen? Because you've developed a great culture, because you're selling the value of being at your company every single day. And if you don't do that, because you'll do that with your clients, you got to do that with your employees as well.
But Bert, you asked who's the best person to communicate.
Yes.
From the candidate's perspective, they look at all the stuff from HR as it's HR speak. Everything's past legal. You know, anything from the CEO has already been vetted through the promotions and marketing department. It doesn't have credibility. Some of the most credible sources of information, there's social proof.
Yeah.
So when you have an existing employee that goes onto Indeed or Glassdoor and posts an employee comment and says, this company's 5 stars and I'm going to give you real authentic reasons why, that resonates with candidates that are shopping around, like Kim was saying, the tide's turned, they're shopping for you.
Very nice. Great input. Yes, Mr. Mark?
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to add too is making sure, for any of you out there, make sure that you have we talked a lot about process on the front, a lot of around recruiting and talent management process. Make sure you have a very tried and true and consistent onboarding process for your employees. You know, onboarding is not day one, filling out the paperwork, and then you just put them out the deep end and say, call if you need any help, and you throw them in the deep end and hope for the best. You know, we work with companies and helping them develop a really robust 90-day onboarding process. Sometimes in some cases goes up to 6 months. And in each of those cases, we try to do that up front too, is every week for the first 2 to 3 months, every week at the end of the end of Friday, we make sure there's a little miniature review with the employee and the manager. And is pretty much is, how did your week go? Are there things, how did your week go? What were the goods and the bads? What was good, bad, and ugly? And then the other kicker I do with managers around servant leadership, what do I need to do to help you be successful? Are there barriers that's making you frustrated about getting your job done? And if you ask your employees that question, especially new employees, guess what? They'll probably say something to you. And then you're going to learn something, so that's not only probably going to improve your onboarding process, but the chances are, again, if you do a poor job of onboarding, and it's truly amazing, we spent all this money putting into getting the person there day one. Usually the amount of money putting in after day one through the first 6 months is almost zero. Because you're like, okay, I brought you in here, now go do something. It's like, no, we got to keep, that's where we go back to re-recruiting people constantly and making sure they're a good fit for the organization and they feel like they can really contribute to the organization and add and find their own place in the organization.
But when you say that, a new light bulb kicked off for me, especially in today's market where that person isn't accepting your job, accepting your position, they're saying no to 2 or 3 others. So if that first 2 or 3 weeks isn't really good, boom, they're right back out and they're fat, dumb, and happy in somebody else's company.
Yeah, and the other thing there too, Bert, just to add really quickly, is most of the people, they were interviewed with lots of companies. So if they haven't made their mind up within the first month or two, guess what? There's a good chance they've had other offers coming in. So if you really do a poor job of onboarding them successfully, there's a really good chance, guess what, after 2 weeks, hey, I'm turning in my resignation because one of these other companies came by and they had an offer for me and they were going to, I feel like they're going to treat me much better than you are, Mr. or Ms. Employee.
Then we're going to do Jim and Jim, and then I'll get into wrap-up mode. And y'all are welcome to talk to everybody.
So first, I just wanted to ask a quick question. I'm loud enough that I think you can hear it. So I want to step back up the funnel. We did a good job in saying we have to bring people in, treat it like a sales process. It's a difficult environment. Now we've got them and got them hired. I'm really interested in that in-between when we're looking at our candidates. And my question is this: do we hire for skill or do we hire for character? And if we're hiring for character, skill I can figure out. But if we're hiring for character, how do we figure that out?
I prefer to start with hiring for character, attitude, and attributes that qualifies somebody for a fit to my job and my company and the attitude of those that they're being managed by. And I think the other side to your question is, how do you define that? There's big conversations around company culture, but I will also give you the reality of the execution of the company culture. Your company culture is 2 degrees of separation from the person that you're hiring. So whomever they are exchanging with, 2 degrees from them is how they realize culture. So if you have, I'm kind of bringing it down to impact to eventually give you something to just think about when you try to define that. Your executives now have a 5 to 7 year lifetime in a company. Managers have a 4 to 6 year. So every time your churn gets faster and higher for those that you've deemed to define your culture, you are now going to have a higher amount of churn because those that defined your culture are no longer there. So when you're thinking about the right attitude and attribute fit for a job, ask those that are 2 degrees difference or degree from working with them to help you define that. And then go to the big picture and say, does the way that this person has defined our scope, what we're expecting for this job, work well? Now, I will also tell you there is a difference between how I expect you to do work at PeopleWork versus whether you go to work for Mark. Same job, different expectations. So and one of our abilities within the platform is that you can choose from 8,000 already plus job profiles. There's so much data out there in studies that if you're asking for an accountant, they are modeled in a certain way. And as long as as long as that person has those those attributes, then you've solved for one of the most complicated components of the equation that disrupt consistency. And then the attitude part is up to the managers, that 2 degree separation. And then the bigger part is the culture.
When we start an engagement around employer brand, we have a discovery phase that includes asking two questions. One is in the area of core values. So most companies have a set of core values that executives have either developed because they're aspirational or they're legit. But then there's something underneath that in the human capital management space we sometimes will refer to as cultural imperatives. This is the operating system of the organization that keeps the thing functional, but they're unwritten rules of engagement. They're the behavioral norms and standards that you expect and you want. And if everybody had it, you'd hear angels singing every day. So those are really important. So one of the things we'll sometimes do, because if it's systemic across the whole organization to have continuity of core values and cultural imperatives, we'll develop questions to use in the interview process that are open-ended questions that elicit information that will tell us, is this person in alignment with those core values and cultural imperatives? It is remarkable what people will tell you if they don't know why you're asking, because they can't game the system if they don't know why you're asking that question. And it's either red or green. There is no yellow. You can tell very, very quickly from a cultural fit perspective if those people are in alignment with that culture you're seeking. Does that help?
All right, Jim, you get last question, and then I'll do wrap up.
Okay, I'll stand up so you can hear me. In these days when we're shifting from labor force to a labor market and trying to create the right kind of brand for potential employees, one tool that a lot of the CEOs I work with have found really helpful is to do a stay interview. So not worrying about why people are leaving on the outbound, because that's too late, but to ask the people on your teams, the ones you really care about, they're the personas you care about, why are they staying? And figure that out, and then create your marketing aimed at those kind of people.
Really good idea. Thank you very much. Well, I want to thank y'all for spending your time and evening with us tonight. I hope, I know that I got a great deal of information out of them, so thank you to the panelists, and hopefully y'all did as well.